Greetings, I'm Thomas, and welcome back to the Basilisk Keep. In this episode, we'll be going over the gloves and the boots. So stay tuned as I go through the process of modifying an off-the-shelf pair of gloves, making some back-of-the-hand armor, and some spats to cover those pesky laces on your boots. Let's get into it. Alright, so I just bought these gloves off the shelf off Amazon. They're a little bit cheap, a little bit worn out, but that adds to the aesthetic, right? Then I have these gloves that I actually handmade using a Leviathan Leatherworks pattern. And I thought that the gray fingertips would look nice on these beat up brown gloves. So I just went through and I cut the fingertips off of my handmade glove and started sewing them to the cheap one. I started by sewing them face to face, as you see here, but it didn't really work out. The seam was a little too thick. It felt uncomfortable. It felt like I was going to rip the leather. So I ended up unstitching the thumb and just restitching everything back together. The outside of the gray fingertips to the inside of the brown gloves, and that seemed to work out fine. So now we get into making some glove armor. This is the exact same process as I went through for the pauldrons, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. Just know that it's a cardboard template that I will eventually be putting for sale on Etsy. Not the cardboard, but a PDF of it. And then once I have the shape I like, I'm going to make it out of Sintra. Alright, I didn't really want to do this, but I need to do a quick recap of what just happened. So, I formed these, and I did a bunch of grinding out with various Dremel bits to fit in some sewable magnets that have been removed from the sewable part. And those will be put in with epoxy. I also sanded them flat on my granite, did some trimming with the X-Acto knife, and I did the heat forming with my heat gun, which you'll remember from the pauldron video. Why am I doing this as a recap and not showing you the actual process? Simple answer. My phone overheated because, one, this is the most poorly insulated room in my house, and two, I had the heat gun going. So my phone crashed and lost all of the video I was recording. Great job, Samsung. Great job, Thomas. Yeah, so next steps, I'm going to glue these in, and then we'll put on some Bondo. I have some on shipment from Amazon. It's not here yet. But the ultimate thing is I don't have to redo these even if I did lose the video. So once again, same as pauldrons, just gonna use some Bondo glazing spot putty and fill any gaps and imperfections and move on. Sanding, much the same as before. I did fill up my sandpaper, partially because the Bondo is a little bit wet, so that's why you see me brushing it out. So you see that I pulled the sewing machine out. There is a method for holding the glove armor to your hand without any hardware or Velcro or snaps that instead uses magnets hidden on elastic inside the glove. I was first made aware of this by watching a reel from Darth Nurse Cosplay on Instagram, and I really appreciate it because, dang, it looks good. And it doesn't, no matter how hard I shake my hand, you'll see at the end of the video, the armor just does not come off. I do have to be careful to make sure that the magnets are in the right place, but otherwise, couldn't ask for better. So this is another Leviathan Leatherworks pattern. This one just came out, so I have to admit I did work with Leviathan Leatherworks to make this pattern. What these are is spats. So there's this thing in Star Wars where there are certain closure methods that are considered taboo. George Lucas didn't want them in the original Star Wars, and for the most part, that's been kept to this day. One of the things I've talked about before on this channel is Velcro and elastic. Those are considered no-nos in the art of Star Wars cosplay. But another thing is shoelaces. So typically, whether you're cosplaying a Mandalorian or a Stormtrooper especially, or even rebels and just random outlaws, typically what you'll see is everybody wears one type of boot. The Chelsea boot. It is a type of boot without laces. And it looks good, and it fits the role very well. But basically everybody uses them for every character in Star Wars. Lately, especially as of the Mandalorian TV show, it has become acceptable for people to use combat boots. But the thing about combat boots is they have laces, and some of them even have zippers. So if you want to be within the rules, as it were, you kind of got to use spats. So this is just some sewn leather that's going to go over my boot and make it look nicer. The eagle-eyed among you will notice that I cut 3 of one side of this sort of L shape when I only needed 2 of each side. Yeah, mistakes happen. Make sure you have enough materials to cover everything. One of the nice things about using real thin leather like this is sheepskin leather, is you can run it through a home sewing machine. So, I've put this sewing machine through its paces, as I've stated in a previous episode. But it'll still get the job done if you pay attention to the tension settings. So I'm just sewing all of these pieces face to face per the pattern instructions, and sometimes making mistakes, because that's who I am. I make mistakes, but I know how to go back and fix them. Don't be worried about making mistakes in your cosplay. So now that the spat has been sewn together, you could just leave it here and it would function fine. But I want to class it up a little bit, so I'm going to do what's called a French seam. That's where you take the seam allowance that's on the inside, you fold it over, and you sew down each side. There's not a whole lot of seam allowance on this pattern because it is a leatherworking pattern, and typically your seam allowances are 1/8 of an inch to maybe 1/4 of an inch. So to help me, what I'm doing is just tacking the seam allowance down with contact cement. You can get leather contact cement that is formulated similar to Elmer's glue. That would look similar to what I'm doing here. Typically, people will use Elmer's contact cement, which is toluene based. Don't tell anyone, I'm just using ModPodge here. It's cheap, it works well, it's flexible, so it's not gonna cause problems later on. I had it on hand, I didn't have to go shopping. Just use ModPodge. Use what's on hand. Cosplay is just like when you're on the convention floor and someone comes up to you and you're trying to act in character. The art of making cosplay is also about improv. Now that everything's been tacked down with glue, I can go through and put in a top stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the edges and away from the existing seams. This, first of all, will help everything stay closed and nice and flat, but it'll also up the elegance of the product. Make it look just a little bit nicer. So I hit record while I was sewing this together, sewing in some elastic at the top of the spat, and my camera decided, no, I'm done, I'm not recording. So here I am showing you or telling you instead of showing you. So now I'm gonna stick the other half of this together. What you're seeing here is a foolish attempt on my part to make the spat wearable with just elastic. At first, I didn't sew enough space of the elastic itself to actually open up and fit over my foot. That's why I'm taking it apart. As you'll see at the end of the video, I did get it to work. It did fit on my shoe with just elastic. However, after I finished recording the video, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to go with the pattern design and make these so that they will close with snaps. And I put a stirrup strap underneath the foot so that they wouldn't be flopping around. The spats do work. I love how they look. Don't make them with elastic if you love your sanity. Alright, so before we get into the conclusions and the lessons learned, I need to make a little bit of an announcement. So, first of all, let me say thank you from the bottom of my heart to all of those of you who have been watching and liking and subscribing and commenting. It really makes my day to see those. That said, I'm not ending the channel, but I need to step it back just a little bit. Having a full regular work schedule, 40 hours a week, plus a family, plus some other side business ventures. Focusing so much on recording and video editing, it's the editing especially that's challenging for me. Not because it's too hard, it's really fairly simple, but it's boring. It just does not work with this brain. It bores me to tears, and it takes a long time to edit. So what that means is I'm not quitting, I'm just going to slow down a little bit. Up to this point, I've been trying and not quite succeeding at delivering a video to you once every month. Well, starting now, moving forward, it's probably going to be closer to once every 2 months. I will be finishing this project. I want to go to Phoenix Fan Fusion in the early summer of 2025, so I will be finishing the project in time for that. Video editing may take a bit longer, and I do still plan to make other costumes for this channel. It's just not going to be quite as fast as I was originally hoping. With that's out of the way, let's get into some lessons learned on this project. First of all, as you may have noticed in the video earlier, there's these gloves. These gloves were the cheapest ones that look cool that I could find on Amazon. These super cheap gloves used super cheap materials, and on this one, the right one in particular, in some places, the leather was so thin it was practically paper. So what I had to do, I had to sew on some patches, and then I sewed on this patch first. Bottom ripped. I sewed on this patch with a tab. I tried to make some really nice smooth leather, some nice stitching, contrasting color, make it look intentional, like professionally repaired. And then it ripped out right here, right along the seam. So I had to add another patch, and I intentionally used some very ugly leather, different color thread, to make it look like a field repair. If your props or costumes are not working the way that you want them to, that's fine. Just roll with it. So the way that the system works, I don't know if I quite covered it the way I wanted to earlier in the video. We've got these sewable magnets, just a little plastic casing, magnet facing up on a piece of elastic. That goes on my hand, over just a little bit, and then the glove goes on. There we go. And then, murmur. This turned out fine. I learned from the lessons on the pauldrons. Good to go. And just like that, it sticks to the back of my hand. And I can move around, I can shake my hand, do all sorts of stuff, and you can see how easy it is to move. It feels like it's gonna fall off, but it doesn't. And that's great. Props to Darth Nurse Cosplay for, if not coming up with this, at very least popularizing it. Thank you. Now moving on to the spats. Sorry. I'll show you some B-roll footage instead of kicking my leg up in the air. These turned out excellent. I love the Leviathan Leatherworks pattern. It looks great. I chose not to add the stirrup straps that go under the foot, but And I see why they're needed now, but I'll be going back and adding those. I learned a thing or two about sewing leather with a machine, so that was fun. Yeah, I think that the content of today's video was a success, even if the recording and the editing almost drove me insane. Not quite, but I will be stepping it back, so you'll probably see the next video sometime around January. Again, thank you so much to all of you who have so far liked and watched and commented. And for those of you who are joining in the future, months, years from now, welcome, thank you. And guess what? You don't have to wait 2 months for the next episode. You can go watch it right now. So, cool. Anyway, thank you for liking and commenting and watching and sharing. It really means the world to me. That is all. So, for now, good luck, don't die, we're all counting on you.